Wow. Well, good evening. I am supremely honored tonight to introduce my friend and longtime colleague, Dr. Rose Brewer, President of the Society for the Study of Social Problems. First of all, I want to extend my apologies for not being with you in person in Chicago, where I live. I just actually happen to be on vacation on the East Coast at the moment. However, I did not want to miss the opportunity to speak in praise of Dr. Brewer's extraordinary and impactful career and the powerful influence she has had on Black studies, the Black freedom movement, interdisciplinary studies, and my own work and life choices. Rose Brewer grew up as a child of the Jim Crow era, a period that many public officials would like to see us return to. She was a product of segregated public schools in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She nevertheless received an invaluable education there. At some point early in life, Rose Brewer saw, recognized, and felt the sting of racism and injustice. And she concluded that she not only wanted to resist, but she wanted to resist in a certain way. Rather than try to insulate or escape injustice as an individual, she took it on in words and deeds as a collective liberatory project, first as a student activist and later as a scholar activist. She did so not just with one book or one action or for one phase of her life, but for multiple decades, and for what has now been an entire life and career, still ongoing. Dr. Rose Brewer is nothing else if not consistent, principled, deeply passionate, and deeply committed to addressing the problems of racial, social, and economic justice. She is also admirably an internationalist. And in this moment of rabid American nationalism, her big picture view of the world and her big hearted view of who her people are is both vitally important and inspirational to many of us. Consistently, her worldview, her students, her colleagues, her readership, and her people have been global, complex, and multinational. In electing Rose Brewer as president of this esteemed professional organization, I'm sure nominators and members look to her stellar curriculum vitae. It marks an array of impressive accomplishments. Of course, she is currently a distinguished teaching professor at University of Minnesota Twin Cities. She is also author of numerous, not only author, editor, and co-editor of numerous texts. And the co-editor part is a part of her collaborative approach to scholarship. She is author of The Color of Wealth, a story behind the U.S. racial divide, which was, of course, a landmark award-winning book, is taught and cited widely. She has also co-authored Beyond the Color of Wealth, Bridges of Power, Women's Multicultural Alliances, Is Academic Freedom Dead? Theory and Practice, which explores the practice of feminist scholarship. She also has penned the U.S. Social Forum, Perspectives of a Movement, a volume capturing the analysis of grassroots activists and organizers who were involved in the U.S. Social Forum. And then two more books, Rod Bush, Lessons from a Radical Black Scholar on Liberation, Love, and Justice, and Sparked, George Floyd, Racism, and the Progressive Illusion. So, very prolific, very powerful, very relevant at each phase. She has won numerous awards and recognitions for her work. And then, my friends, there are the accomplishments not on the curriculum vitae, not touted in the official bio, and not emphasized by the modest, unassuming scholar who is my friend and colleague and your president. Dr. Rose Brewer has worked overtime to make sure she moves the needle on freedom and justice, that she moves the needle not simply on studying, but confronting some of the most pressing social problems of our time. When I think of Rose Brewer's exemplary career as a scholar activist, community-based scholar, and people's intellectual, I think of her work with Project South, a deeply rooted and deeply respected community organization, which has been an anchor and an enduring part of the landscape of freedom work in the South. I think of her role as co-founder of the Freire Center in Minneapolis, a community center for training and teaching liberatory pedagogy based on the teachings of Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. When I think of Rose Brewer's career, I think of her influence in the World Social Forum, where she insisted on a global vision of justice and social change that rightly rejected both Eurocentric and US-centric approaches to change. Finally, the idea of presidential authority and presidential power is very troubling and very fraught in this moment. I feel pain in my gut when I hear the title president mentioned. Tonight is different, however. I'm very proud and hopeful to claim Rose Brewer as our president of SSSP. I'm proud to claim her and salute her as a president of exceptional integrity, admirable vision, and an unprecedented commitment to truth-telling. If only all our presidents could have those qualities. I'm eager to hear her remarks tonight and look forward to all that she will continue to do, as we are so grateful for all that she has done already. Dr. Rose Brewer, my friend, my colleague, congratulations on your presidency, and I look forward to your remarks tonight.
Thank you so much, Professor Ransby, Barbara, friend, colleague. That was incredibly moving. It's always interesting to see how those you admire see you, and I'm deeply appreciative of your remarks. Welcome all to this presidential talk. That's one way to think about it, but it's more than that. We will be also recognizing the tremendous contributions a little bit later on of SSSP members and honorees with awards. And of course, we're going to do a little partying and have a little fun after that as we celebrate the 75th year of this organization. First of all, it's quite gratifying to see all of you here this afternoon. Thank you for your support of the society and being here to recognize all that we've done and joining us in honoring these 75 years, and with great hope for 75 more. Having said that, let me begin. Our struggle is a long one. For those of us who are striving for a transformed world, our commitment to emancipatory change must be clear, deep, and uncompromising. Indeed, when the Lees, Alfred McClung and Elizabeth Bryant, broke with the American Sociological Society in 1950 and 1951, they had envisioned a different kind of professional association and social science. McClung Lee saw and pointed out that, quote, the 1950s was the period when the nation's colleges and universities were becoming increasingly dependent upon and responsive toward the federal government and the academic community's collaboration with McCarthyism. That was a key part of the process. The Alfred McClung Lee question of sociology for whom, asked decades ago, is germane to the current moment. It has resonated with generations of scholars and activists and aligns with the Robert Staunton Lynn question in a book titled Knowledge for What? For the Lees, both of these questions represented a commitment to people-centered theory and scholarship. The queries converge with the high period of the 1960s radicalism, as Richard Flax observed in his analysis of the radical sociology movement. These academic radicals had also been moved by the question, sociology for whom? Of course, the Black freedom movement had, by that time, already raised hard and critical questions about the nature of the US society, about the academy, anti-Blackness, and deeply structured institutional racism that academics and researchers could not or would not answer. And now in this 75th organizational year since the founding, the societal contradictions are increasingly clear. We are in a deeply reactionary, fascistic historical moment. It is a tumultuous time and a period of political, economic, and social crises. We live in full effect of rising authoritarianism with a war on truth, right to protest with attacks on anti-racist struggles, LGBTQ+, women, immigrants, and the global working class. It is quite clear that the issue is more than good policy. It is about the very existence of the world's peoples and our planet. Our charge is to be engaged in a transformational praxis, theory and praxis. We have no choice. Given this, I craft my analysis in three parts: a historical grounding, the current conjuncture, and insurgent sociology toward emancipatory theory and action. Let's begin with a bit of historical grounding. And I think I can figure out how to work this. Didn't happen. Whatever. Helps. This has been the bane of this afternoon. Yeah, can I? What happened? Oh. Okay, we don't want the title. we want to move it. Oh, that's what I want right there. 18 years after the founding of SSSP, by 1968, revolution was in the air. Fires were burning in Black uprisings in the US after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Hundreds of cities went up in flame. Anti-colonial struggles continued across the African world, and the Tet Offensive on January 30th, 1968, by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese people made it quite clear in real time the US was engaged in an imperialist war on the Vietnamese people, and the Vietnamese were fighting for their full liberation against what they called the Americans. Closer to these shores, the ASA meetings in Boston in '68 marked an important turning point for sociologists and radical academics broadly. The slide that you're seeing now is an excerpt from an important historical document that I was able to obtain, written by Martin Nicholas. It was called Fat Cat Sociology. There are a few of those edited volumes around. It was really difficult digging it out. Maybe some of you have copies of it. I know a few of you were actually in that process then. Won't name names, but you know what I'm talking about. But this Fat Cat Sociology excerpt by Nicholas, it really came in the context of protests by what at that time was called radical sociological formation. Wilbur Cohen, who was Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, was selected as the keynote speaker at the '68 ASA meetings in Boston. Martin Nicholas was the fought for other voice on the platform, representing the radical sociologist. He gave his Fat Cat Sociology speech, and this is just a bit of an excerpt from it. Nicholas asserts, the ruling elite within your profession is in charge of what is called health, education, and welfare. Those of you who listened passively to what he had to say presumably agreed that this definition, this description of what the man did, carried an accurate message. Yet among you are many, including the hard researchers, who do know better or should know better. The department of which the man is head is more accurately described as the agency which watches over the inequitable distribution of preventable disease, over the funding of domestic propaganda and indoctrination, and over the cheap and docile reserve labor force, taking everyone's wages down. He, in fact, is the Secretary of Propaganda and Scabbing. So they were right on point. We could be talking about right now, right? As radical scholars, they were shaking up the internal dynamics of the academy and of a particular field, sociology. Black, brown, and women were contending with some of the same exclusionary factors in associations, and of course, the epistemological distortions of the field. Students were bringing the heat to campuses. Indeed, Black, Brown, and Asian students had already challenged the academy to teach the true history of the lives of the students who had been erased from the curriculum, whose people had been colonized, enslaved, and experienced genocide. They demanded that the university must be transformed, must meaningfully engage with excluded communities. This was a revolutionary charge by the students involved in the Third World Liberation Front, strikes in 1968. And of course, 68 keeps resonating. It's a banner year in a lot of ways. Across California campuses, and ultimately hundreds of colleges, tens of hundreds of universities, as well as high schools, would make similar demands across the US. They understood all too clearly that the academy was deeply complicit in the perpetration of racism, that the ivory tower lived the contradictions of missions expounding truth and justice while deeply engaged in erasure, exclusion, classism, elitism, sexism, racism, ableism, corporatization. This history underpins what we're facing today. The dates are different, but the structure of power remains in place. Education is always political in one way or another, supporting one set of interests or another. And radical Black feminist thinkers have long understood this, from the Shirley Graham Du Bois's sharpest announcements around the nature of imperialism, colonialism, and Africa, to the queer Black women of the Combahee River Collective, who asserted an overtly anti-white supremacist, anti-capitalist, and anti-patriarchal politics of the 1960s and 70s, to the leaders of the most recent upsurge of Black radical feminist abolition in the context of the murder of George Floyd in 2020. This is an excerpt from another historical document I was able to obtain by Shirley Graham Du Bois. And it's a statement that she made in 1970 on imperialism, colonialism, and Africa. Let's just take a look at this. Quote, she said, "They love our African sunshine. Our beautiful broad rivers are bright gold, our sparkling diamonds, our copper, magnesium, bauxite, and oil. They do not love Africans or the children of Africa. Wherever they are, wherever they are." Among the various decisions of the Western world which have affected the lives and the destinies of Afro-Asians, the non-whites, the peoples of the so-called third world, none have revealed more clearly the very essence of Western racism, nor demonstrated more conclusively the capacity of the Western world to transform, translate, and legitimize the basic power thrust under the cloak of international law and morality, resonating very broadly. And as I mentioned, by the 2020s, similar observations and runway. I think it's the other way, isn't it? Whoops. Help. Advance it. How do I do that? Okay. Green bucket? Okay. Oh, there it is. And that's just an image of heavily led by queer Black women. And this was a protest that was held at that time. And as my home city now, I lived it in real time. So it's really quite meaningful and hold utmost respect for the young people who took that stand. Okay. Moving right along. So I've articulated some of the historical grounding leading to the current moment. Now, number two, what of the current conjuncture? And this image is of Colombia. I know it's a familiar one. The police forces. And it's relevant because we know the image, but it's the militarization, the policing, the use of the state that is quite important and profound for the current moment. The conjunctural frame is significant, and I like the words of Cedric Johnson because it gives us, I think, the kind of gravitas we need if we're really going to talk about creating an emancipatory or an insurgent sociology. And he captures, and there are a number of ways to think about conjuncture, but this one in its, I think, activation example notes that historical conjuncture entails describing the exact balance of forces, state of overdetermination of the contradictions at any given moment to which political tactics must be applied. So we have to have a clear sense of those balance of forces. And these brilliant young people certainly recognize so much of that. The conjuncture. Keep that in mind. I don't know how often we as sociologists, perhaps as Marxist sociologists, perhaps as radical sociologists, this rings true. I know I haven't seen it in sociology text in my graduate materials, but we're going to put it right in the center of what we're thinking about. The conjuncture entailing racial capitalism, the system of imperial racial monopoly capitalism. That's the conjuncture. And of course, that can vary, but it's certainly since the 70s into the current moment. And certainly another marking point perhaps is 2008, when the system was almost taken apart by the crisis then. But and then, as now, we are in a particular crisis of capitalism in the US and the global capitalist system. This is the conjuncture we're dealing with. We're in the throes of a declining empire that is deadly dangerous domestically and globally. And critically, the contradictions are sharpening between the corporative, extractive economy and human needs and the Earth's limits. In its global reach, the system is advanced, and rather than simply saying racial capitalism, I like imperial racial monopoly capitalism. It is a profit-driven system simultaneously located in the logics of imperialism, white supremacy, and heteropatriarchy. Monopolies exploit labor and natural resources and the exportation of finance capital rather than manufactured goods to sustain colonialism, which is the integral function of imperialism. The word imperial is used in this stage of capitalism to emphasize the global nature of this conjuncture in the system that we're dealing with. And here's a reference, if you haven't seen this piece called Imperialist War and Class Conflict, came out in 2024. And Torquil Lawson is the author and makes very clear that we are in a period, and you know, we don't have to be scholars necessarily to recognize this, that is deeply marked by imperialist war and class conflict. We could have a whole plenary on that particular discussion. And before this particular article was written, long before, I know many of you are familiar with the work of Samir Amin, preeminent theorist of colonialism and the third world. And as the late Samir Amin articulates, capitalism is not only a system based on the exploitation of labor by capital, it is also a system based on polarization in its development on the world scale. Capitalism and imperialism are the two inseparable faces of the same reality, that of historical capitalism. And this is a book that some of you are probably familiar with. Only People Make Their Own History, Writings on Capitalism, Imperialism, and Revolution. And we miss him deeply. He was also quite instrumental in trying to build Global International, was active in the social forum process, and brought, before his transition, a deep desire that the world would come together once again in this kind of global effort to create the world that we want. There are others who have written. I lift up two feminist scholars, Francois Vergist, and just gave the Stewart Hall lecture about a couple of weeks ago, and has written extensively on the issues that I've been putting on the table. But here is something that she said in the context of that lecture. There will be no future without the seizing of the present. That's the title of the talk. Imagining a post-racist and post-capitalist future seems impossible when the present is plagued with imperialist wars, when catastrophic floods, hurricanes, and fires engulf our planet, when murderous migration policies and increased poverty further entrenches racism, xenophobia, and misogyny into the fabric of our societies, liberating the present from colonization, racial neoliberalism, capitalism, and the forces which make our planet uninhabitable for human and non-human species alike, necessitates orienting our political imaginations toward wholesale revolutionary change. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who is an activist, scholar, geographer. And this is a piece easily attainable. I use it in my graduate and undergraduate courses called Geographies of Racial Capitalism. And this is an interview that she did in 2021 and uses the term racial capitalism. Just an excerpt. I go down this path of trying to think globally in order to think about how today, given the catastrophe of racial capitalism on a world scale, its particular form of austerity and neoliberalism in permanent war that we struggle through requires an approach to solving problems that, however particular and local they are, have an international dimension. Same frame, slightly different way of confronting it. Because it is, she asserts, an international problem. Capitalism requires inequality, and racism enshrines it. As those of you who have gone through theory classes, certainly Marx probably showed up in one way or another, as his work and Engels articulated the inner workings of capitalist political economy. The people that I've lifted up, Amin, Tarkil, Burgess, and Gilmore, articulate the racial capitalist imperialist core of the system. There's another younger scholar that is well worth reading. You might be familiar with Arun Kunani, but brings our attention to yet another feature of the current conjuncture that's relevant for our understanding. When he talks about, and not the only person who has done this, not only the only scholar who's done this, but the racist bordering regimes with their huge death tolls in the seas and deserts to the south of Europe and the United States. And of course, we're in the middle of that at this moment. And their warehousing of millions of refugees in camps conveniently far from the West. No new idea here, being implemented as we speak. For other theorists, such as Andy Clarno, he takes more directly on. I'm not trying to reconcile traditional Marxists necessarily with the racial capitalist formation along these lines, or the imperial racialist capitalist formation. But it is something that's going on and has to be teased out. But I did want to note that some thinkers, such as Clarno, really challenge a little bit more directly the idea of the labor capital relationship in his analysis of racial capitalism. So it's not a matter of these being seamless conceptualizations. And I dare say there are contradictions that run through, but I also can glean very important aspects of them that I think is well worth listening to. And in Clarno's conceptualization, he really notes that there are two interwoven processes at play here: accumulation by dispossession and coercive labor. That's not too far from what other revolutionary theorists have said. But he goes on to say that the latter, which may involve either exploitation or job exclusion and abandonment, and I'll quote directly, while white supremacy may intensify exploitation by devaluing Black labor, it can also generate necropolitical projects that equate the security of the white population with the elimination of Black, Indigenous, and other devalued populations. There is a group or a set of groups that are differentiated and are in a differential way vulnerable to premature death. And this seems to have, from my observation and study, quite a bit of relevance to understanding the current conjuncture. In sum, indeed, capitalism is a world system, and it is a system in deep trouble today. During a period of so-called economic triumph, millions of people in the US and outside remain underemployed, houseless, without access to healthcare, education, food, most direly in poor white, Black, brown, Indigenous, and immigrant communities. This surplus population of peoples here and globally makes it quite clear that labor is expendable under the dictates of the global capitalist class. It is a period marked by the intensification of state violence. Nothing original, you're experiencing it every day: militarism and occupation. And given the current realities, violence often turns inward. This disinvestment, a tense attack on the working class, is part and parcel of this neoliberal, racial, capitalist, imperial moment. And having said all of that, we have little choice. In fact, we have no choice but to take a stand. And we're fighting not only a material and political economic reality, but understanding how powerful the ideology of all of this is embedded in our psyche, in the consciousness, or the attempted consciousness of all of us, and certainly in our children, embedded in the attempt to erase the complex colonizing history of this country. And as the Lees observed 75 years ago in speaking about university complicity with McCarthyism, today's complicity and concession to the erasure of truths by the so-called great universities more and more across the board, from Columbia to Brown to Harvard, and the list goes on to the publics. There's one other piece in this conjuncture. It doesn't integrate seamlessly in my remarks, but I do want to make point that for the social movement scholars in the room, for the political economists in the room, for those who are studying this political moment, and I think this was lifted up at our opening plenary just a day or so ago, trying to understand this conjuncture in the context of electoral politics and the MAGA state. There are a number of left formations, most small, but doing very, I think, important work. We have some of those people here in the space, whether it be the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, who are thinking through this just as those in the academy are doing. It is in our interests to converge in those efforts. I selected an analysis from one such organization. I'm not saying you have to agree with it. I think it is relevant, and I think it makes my point that not all of the complexity that we're contending with is coming or can come from any singular source. So whether it be Lerner, whether it be DSA, whether it be an emerging organization like North Star Socialist, This is from a left formation called Liberation Road, and they just released their comprehensive assessment of the current moment. Let me do a little bit more with the slides here. Let's see. This is from their main political report, where they look at the MAGA right, Liberation Road. This is section 323, the balance of power. And remember when we're talking about conjuncture and how we struggle assessing those forces and the balance therein. This is their assessment. I mean, we're not going to debate it today, but for giving some thought to what about the state. When MAGA forces have won trifecta control of the federal government, they have not yet consolidated a hegemonic bloc around their social, political, and economic agenda. Many of their ideas are deeply unpopular, and the common sense remains highly contested. With full control of the levers of the federal government, they may be able to impose major portions of their agenda by force and fiat. And of course, we're seeing some of that. But without the consent of key social forces, this is, how we're thinking about this emancipatory strategy that we're contending with. They will not be able to consolidate their control. Nevertheless, the components of this attempted right-wing takeover bear the key characteristics of fascism, including centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy, and suppression of individual interest to a perceived notion of the national good. There's been a tendency to view the politics, ideology, and program of both Donald Trump and the broader MAGA movement as erratic, incoherent, and unserious. To call these fascists is to insist that we take the right's attempts to cohere a new hegemonic bloc as they do. Deadly serious. Does not mean that their project will succeed, but it does mean that we must adequately understand what they're trying to construct if we are to defeat it. We must adequately understand. So, not sure exactly where I am time-wise, but the third piece of my analysis today harks back to the title of the talk and raises the question of emancipatory struggles. In this hard, difficult, conjunctural space I've discussed today, with no immediate resolution of what we must do, there are and must be sites of struggle, collective resistance, joint initiatives in deep solidarity across the local and global. And sometimes the enemy looks like the dispossessed, but are inculcated in a system where, quote, the technology, the regimes, the targets are the same, quote, as Angela Davis astutely observes. Or as George James asserts, the words of anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, and anti-colonialism flow from the lips, but not from the practice of the so-called liberal left wing of resistance. The question becomes, what kind of struggle do we need? And how do we engage in catalyzing transformational change? As already pointed out, the economic system in which the Academy is rooted is foundational to understanding what we're up against. It continues its white supremacist class exploitation and settler project, and we operate within this context. It is in this setting that we teach. Most directly, it is in the pedagogy of the university classroom that most of us, and I know we have a range of folk who are not necessarily in the academy, who are doing research, are researchers, but this applies broadly. Most of it haunts us directly. It threatens our students, faculty, staff, and community. When so-called education professes equity, but is not an innocent nor safe space, that is a serious problem. When it rearticulates unnamed assumptions that way back in '68, Black students were saying, we don't see ourselves in this. Of what it means to be capable. We must deeply interrogate the meaning of what we're doing. both as scholars, both as teachers, both as people in a world that we are inextricably linked to one another. Yet in so many ways, we continue operating on the level of the individual in terms of resistance, defaulting to individual response, although self and change consciousness are imperatives, as we must think and act through change consciousness as well as collectively, but definitely systemically. And our practice must be rooted structurally. We say we do this, especially as sociologists, many of us say we do this, but do we live this? Do we continue to live in these silos? Of course, the academy must be a site of emancipatory theory and perhaps insurgency and practice, but this must be connected to struggles in the broader social order, an imperial racist capitalist social order that spans campus, community, society, and globe. This is the kind of emancipatory logic that transcends the snare of a certain kind of liberal complacency. It demands a deeply structural interrogation of what we're dealing with. It means understanding sharply conjuncture and clarity about the hard truths of social change in its global reach. This sets the context for articulating the necessity of a radical praxis in and out of the university. This is the kind of insurgency that transcends the snare of a too liberal logic. And drawing once again on the insights of Konani, as he states boldly, it is not a politics of diversity. It operates beyond the individual psyche through economic and political forces. Racism, classism, sexism are projections onto the skin of structures of inequality. It is mediated through individuals, but tied to economic structures, that which is rooted in property and can't be undone by persuasion. Thus, to get to the heart of the matter, we must grasp, as Kunani asserts, a whole structure. Given this, I make the following case. Our emancipatory practice must engage all of us, our communities, university, and the broader society. The dialectic can engage the classroom, which many of us spend quite a bit of time. And as we attempt to share theory, teach, struggle, if we do social movements in our work, but also asking our students to connect those things happening on the ground, reflecting back, and then building sites of new struggle. This is the praxis that's at the heart of this work within universities and beyond. No doubt, the issues we confront are complex, centered in a complicated set of social and political realities. Struggle requires simultaneously turning inward and outward regarding the nature of the current moment, the historical moment, and future possibilities. As noted, unfortunately, we don't operate in an innocent space if we are in the academy. And as over 20 years ago, historian Gay Tuckman noted, the university had already been marked by the logic of markets and privatization, operating as sites of individualism with the negation of collectivity and with genocidal erasure. Yet this is not the end of the story. Old and young freedom fighters, Black, brown, indigenous, white, strikingly queer, radical Black feminists, revolutionary socialists, and abolitionists abound. We just can't be fragmented. We witnessed them on our campuses, in our communities, and in the world. And beyond lifting the veil on hypocrisy, they have a big role to play. And let me just share this last. That's the wrong one. Another familiar site. And what might I say else about this moment? We're in a conjuncture of profound urgency. understanding, being clear about the long durée of exploitation, expropriation, extractivism. We know that our work is looming large before us. We are confronting the consequences of a rapacious, profit-driven system, dangerously teetering toward a fascist response to resolve its contradictions, meaning we must develop deep strategy, collectivity, and a steely commitment and political will to build the powerful resistance that is so desperately needed. We must, there is no choice, no other choice. We're all inextricably meshed with one another and the world. No ivory tower, really. We must continue to fill our mission of knowledge producers with the sharpest and most committed to that process. Knowledge for the people, as the Elise asserted, knowledge for justice and social transformation for the new world. I continue to draw and find sustenance from my growing up years in a racial apartheid America. It doesn't go away, it stays with you forever. Those were my born years. I continue to draw upon the Black political resistance for self-determination and social transformation here and globally. There are some enduring tropes of struggle that should be studied, and we should study them carefully. And I know many of you do, as we embark on trying to build a radical insurgent sociology. So I want to close with the insights of a brilliant revolutionary, the great African revolutionary Amilcar Cabral, leader of the struggles in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. He provides deep lessons for the long haul struggle we must engage. Being the great dialectical thinker that he was, Cabral asserts, we know that the development of a phenomenon in movement, whatever its external appearance, depends mainly on its internal characteristics. Let me say that one more time. We know that the development of a phenomenon in movement, whatever its external experience, depends mainly on its internal characteristics. We also know that on the political level, our own reality, however fine and attractive the reality of others may be, can only be transformed by detailed knowledge of it, by our own efforts, by our own sacrifices. The radical impulses which inform this period of struggle are drawn from the teachings of brilliant theorists and revolutionists such as Cabral, but he wasn't the only one. Many of them remain unnamed, but they do converge with the long durée of political resistance and change. What we are imagining, minimally, is the struggle for a new society built on shared resources, social development of all humanity, deep democracy, and sustainability of the earth. That's the vision of these young people. That should be ours also. Thank you.